And this first is an investigative piece from Reuters where they interview 80 plus people from, I think, what they say over a dozen nations. And the point of this piece is to highlight that Taiwan has been building in trying to, I guess, develop the ability to produce domestically at least assembled submarines. And so, as this article gets into, the Taiwan has interacted with at least 7 nations in order to get to the point where I guess they feel fairly close to being able to starting to assemble 8 domestically produced modern conventional submarines. Now, one of the important things, and I guess one of the issues that Taiwan runs into is, of course, if you have like a nuclear powered submarine, you have to have fairly highly enriched uranium to be able to run those. I think they actually run what on 90% enriched uranium, or at least 60. And so the U.S., that all they produce is the nuclear submarines, and so we can't sell Taiwan those because that would be way too provocative to put that kind of technology with Taiwan, as we saw with the reaction, say, to the AUKUS treaty, where this technology is going to go to Australia. And then there really isn't another country that's willing to sell Taiwan any conventionally made submarines. France produces those, Norway produces those. In fact, 2 of the 4 submarines that Taiwan currently has, its 2 bigger and more modern submarines, their Sea Dragons, are actually made by Norway, and then Norway continues to maintain those. So, this article outlines and says that both the United States and the UK have shipped portions of the submarines, or at least have promised to Taiwan. The U.S. has given combat system components and sonar, so this seems to be more high tech pieces. The UK's role is a little bit more obscured, but a lot of it seems to go through this Gibraltar based company. And for people who don't know, the last time this like little territory came up was, of course, when an Iranian ship was seized going into the Mediterranean Sea. But if you look at like the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea coming from the Atlantic Ocean, part of what hangs off the bottom of Spain is actually a UK colony, Gibraltar. And so this is one of the most highly vaccinated places in the world and all this, but it's also a place where a company was set up called, let me see here, Gavron Limited, and it was set up in 2013. And one of the things that it has done is helped Taiwan obtain the needed technical expertise to actually build the submarines, because they're getting sonar from the US. I don't know what they're getting from the UK and everything, but to put all this together and make a functional submarine is kind of complicated if they're not getting the actual design plans from another country. And so they're trying to acquire the people they need to do that. And one of the main people putting this together is the UK Commandant Ian McGee, Gee spelled Mc, McGhei. Yeah, so he seems to be a pretty important figure in all of this. Now, the information you get in the article, this seems like a pretty official release to me, Connor. It doesn't seem like this was like a scoop that the Taiwanese government was particularly uncomfortable with, even though since this project started after the current Taiwanese leader, President Tees, won election in 2016 is when they started putting this together. There's only a few people within even the Taiwanese government that have been briefed on it and everything. However, now it seems they're pretty ready to come full circle with this, and just come out and let people know that, hey, we're going to have this technology. So I guess the reason that Taiwan sees this as important is because they're hoping to deploy these submarines east of the Taiwanese island, and their hope is that the deep water there, the Chinese subs won't be able to get into, and this would give them some kind of advantage tactically to be able to essentially have these assets hidden there, to retaliate if China should attack. And so, this is just really interesting, Connor. Of course, you have countries like South Korea, Australia, India, Spain, and Canada also helping out, although it's not exactly clear what kind of services all these countries are providing. But with this project, and it does, seem somewhat of an official, like, Western project to help Taiwan get these submarines. My guess is that China will find some way to counter this. Maybe they're going to develop some kind of new submarine or nuclear package with Russia. Maybe they look and put a whole bunch of their own money into developing submarine detecting technology. But at this point, Taiwan feels that it will give them a military edge once they're able to complete this project, which again has been carried out in secret up until this point. That they talk about having a low profile strategy because if other countries were building submarine packages, like helping Cuba build submarines, the U.S. would be sanctioning them. And so obviously, China is going to be upset and try to exert pressure on various countries who are helping Taiwan with this project. But again, now that it's coming more open, I guess they feel pretty comfortable that they're going to be able to manage this. One last thing to note is the debate within Taiwan was whether to build these submarines, which submarines are fairly expensive technology. And while they do provide a real benefit to being, very hard to detect and very good, if you strike us, we could fire back with our submarines. This is kind of famously what Ron Paul's idea is, get rid of two legs of the nuclear triad and keep the nuclear submarines, at least at this point, So, there's that, but they also point out that, hey, having mobile rock missile launchers and anti-ship missiles could be a more effective actual deterrent against China and come at a far cheaper cost. And this does wreak somewhat of like a military industrial complex issue here, Connor, where you just have a lot of money being poured into this kind of project, where again, the mobile missile launchers could be cheaper and easier to operate and maintain and all that. So, I think that about covers all the importance here. I guess I'll also mention that Taiwan's other two submarines, so again, they have the two Sea Dragons, which are newer. They have two U.S. Guppy-class submarines. I didn't look up much about them. This article describes them as World War II vintage. I'm sure they have plenty of upgrades on them and everything like that, modern computers. But I'm not exactly sure what those look like or how much use they could be, if Taiwan did get into some kind of exchange with China. So, yeah, that was, I thought, a pretty interesting article here, Connor, though. I don't know if you had anything else on any important details that I might have missed.
No, just that this has actually been advocated for. I mean, not specifically this project, but now that they're doing it more out in the open, it means that it'll probably just be supported more by, we keep seeing senators come out and proposing all kinds of deals about yearly aid packages they want to start giving to Taiwan for their military. And like you said, just major boon for the military industrial complex. But there was this new report that came out from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, an annual report to Congress. And it was pretty hawkish. They're talking about, giving Biden the power to, prohibit American investment in specific Chinese business entities, and give Biden the power to prohibit critical supply chain relationships with China. But one of the things that they say is that Congress should, quote, take urgent measures to strengthen the credibility of U.S. military deterrence in the near term, including prioritizing the delivery of weapons to Taiwan and deploying more cruise and ballistic missiles to the Indo-Pacific. So, of course, it's just
Yeah, I want to mention one thing about this report, Connor, and why I think it's kind of important. And that is Congress, I don't think they really know a whole lot about China. Like, we just recently had 5 lawmakers go to Taiwan this week. And I'm not even sure they understand like why China would protest their visiting Taiwan or anything like that. We had Elise Stolkin, who probably does understand what she's doing, but then you also had Mark Takano, Nancy Mace, Colin Allred, and Sarah Jacobs all
A lot
also
of
attend the
Democrats.
trip. Yeah, I think Mace was the one that made it bipartisan, right? Because I think the
Honorary Republican.
yeah, got to make the trip bipartisan. So, I'm not even sure they really understand why these things are so provocative. But they have those reports, and then that's all they really have. That's all they really know about China, right? They just know what's in that stupid little report that some hots wrote that work for think tanks and also get a paycheck from Congress. And so I think these things have a lot more potency. And if you look and read these reports, you'll often find in coming weeks that you'll hear members of Congress say things that somebody who skimmed the report read, not somebody who really understood it, but somebody who sat there and was like, oh, China bad, Uyghur, Taiwan straight, air defense identification zone. And then they'll have an interview on Fox News or MSNBC and say all those slogan and keywords.
CCP bad.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. I had a couple other stories I just wanted to mention, Connor. The commander of the 7th Fleet, this is Vice Admiral Carl Thomas, is calling for more U.S. aircraft carriers in the Pacific. So, right now, I think Russia has one or two kind of functioning aircraft carriers. China, I think, has one old Russian Soviet aircraft carrier, one domestically produced. And so, the U.S. has 10 or 11 right now aircraft carriers. So obviously we outnumber the aircraft carriers by quite a bit. But this admiral is saying that really what we need is at least 4 aircraft carriers in the Pacific, which is a lot. I remember a few years ago, I think 2017, when tensions with North Korea were very high, and Trump had the Reagan and then I think 2 of the smaller aircraft carriers also deployed to the region. This was seen as a big deal. And so right now, the Vice Admiral is asking for 4, but he then goes on to say, 4 is great, but with such a big space, 6, 7, 8 would even be better. That's actually what he says. So,
Oh my God.
they're asking for 8 aircraft carriers in the Pacific. Now, one of the important things about that, Connor, is the way the military kind of conducts its Navy is that it has like 3. So let's say it has 9 aircraft carriers. Like 3 would be considered like out and on active duty. 3 would be like import on standby, able to go out if needed, but potentially like getting minor upgrades and servicing. And then you would have the other 3 that are getting like full upgrades and servicing, like not available to go out and fight a war at that time. Like, maybe they month or so they get it ready, but those ships are like in dry dock and stuff. And so, or I don't know if they put the full aircraft carriers in dry dock, but they definitely like take them out of commission for a time to like do all the upgrades that need to be done. These are gigantic ships that have so much that needs to be done, particularly with the propulsion systems and all that. So if he's asking for 8, that's really 24, I think, by the way the Navy math works. And that's just for the Pacific. This is an insane number of aircraft carriers they're talking about, especially when you have people such as Lyle Goldstein, who used to work at the Naval War College, even saying that these things are outdated. They're floating targets. He says the best thing is that the ships are kind of like durable, and so they could take a couple hits. Well, the problem is that if you take a hit on an aircraft carrier, you now have 5,000 something hostages floating in the middle of the ocean. And so anytime you go to rescue them, those ships all become targets too, very easy targets of any anti-ship missiles. And so it's not very simple to just say like, oh, we're going to have this powerful fleet of aircraft carriers. Those aircraft carriers could actually become massive liabilities should any actual fighting break out.
And can we imagine like what the domestic reaction would be? Just the domestic reaction would be if you lost, say, to deter whatever China is anticipating, they shoot one aircraft carrier with like one of those ship killer missiles, you lose 6,000 sailors right there.
Yeah.
That's, what, two 9/11s in one shot. And I know I was just listening to Peter Van Buren recently talk on the Scott Horton show, and he's talking about how he says we regularly have two aircraft carriers based in the Pacific these days, and the British are deploying two super carriers there pretty soon as well. So, it's just we're continuing the encircling of China, but it's coming at this rapid pace. And then in the meantime, you have like Jake Sullivan coming out and saying, well, we don't want a Cold War. We want to manage the competition. Let's keep it together. So is it just a corporate welfare scheme, and we're pretending we're going to go to war? We're going to go to war and sail warships to the Taiwan Strait, or you can't do that to people. I mean, this whole policy with Russia, it's you can't constantly threaten another country with attack and expect everybody to just stay cool. It's ridiculous. It leads to this kind of ridiculous, this admiral postulating that, oh, well, we could have 8. Why not? If we have 4, why not 8? Double it.
And another issue too is that whenever you have an aircraft carrier, it's not just an aircraft carrier, it's an aircraft carrier battle group. And so this includes guided missile destroyers, it includes support ships and other frigates, amphibious assault ships. There's, a lot of other like firepower that comes along with one of these aircraft carriers. And, while Americans aren't typically aware of that, the Chinese are.
Early on in Biden's administration, he sent 2 aircraft carrier strike groups and started doing war drills in the South China Sea, in a major message right at the beginning.
Yeah.
Very early on.
I want to mention quickly, Connor, that a U.S. destroyer made a port call in New Zealand. This doesn't happen very often, and while New Zealand is technically a part of a treaty with the U.S., and I believe Australia is the other member, there are some issues because of New Zealand's non-nuclear position, and so like only a few U.S. ships could actually visit New Zealand ports, because I don't think any of the ships that are nuclear propulsion can actually, by the way, New Zealand law works, actually go do a port call. But this does signal that New Zealand is somewhat still on board with the general U.S. military mission, enforcing the rules-based international order, which even the Pentagon admits is just anti-China lingo. Also want to mention quickly that Japan is increasing its defense spending to a whopping 1.14% of its GDP. So for all the U.S. needs to build up in the Pacific and everything, when you actually look at the spending of the countries that are supposed to be the ones that are in the crosshairs of China, their defense spending is absolutely dwarfed by the U.S. and really isn't that much compared to their own GDP. Japan's defense spending will come in at $53 billion, and of course this is less than 10% of what the U.S. is going to spend. So I don't know. It always seemed to me, Connor, that it is a pretty important and transparent argument that if these countries are really concerned about China, they'd probably be spending a little bit more time and money on their own militaries. I think you want to mention that the Pentagon did a review and decided they wanted to upgrade a couple of bases.
Yeah. So they just released the Global Posture Review for the overall, Pentagon military posture around the world. One of the things that, one of the things that comes with the Asia pivot, of course, is the idea is that they're shifting 2/3 of all air and naval forces to East Asia. Now, a lot of, as we've talked about on the show, a lot of regional actors in the Middle East have begun to, negotiate with each other and try and find diplomatic solutions to standing issues between them, especially the adversaries like even Iran and Saudi Arabia, because after Biden withdrew from Afghanistan and they've pulled, missile defenses out of Saudi Arabia, people think that they're leaving, regional actors believe that the U.S. is getting ready to start really shifting its assets for the most part over to the what they call the Indo-Pacific. Although this report suggests that that's not exactly true, that they are still planning on, of course, fighting wars in the Middle East, that there's no real intent to leave Syria and Iraq or Africa, of course, and they're still going to be surrounding Russia with NATO forces and building and militarizing areas near Russia's border. However, they are looking to improve bases in Guam and Australia, so that they can, what they say, basically to counter China. And they still say that China is the pacing challenge, and that the Asia Pacific is their what they call priority theater. But they are basically what they're doing is they're going to focus on airfields so they can better transport troops in and out of the bases, and also expand storage for weapons and ammunition. And they're trying to make it more conducive for regular deployments, and of course for an eventual or potential conflict. And Let's see. They also, of course, say that they want to build up more cooperation. I mean, we assume this, but more cooperation with allies in the region, and to build up further forces to counter China.
All right, Karen, we got the UK MI6 saying that China is that agency's single greatest priority as well. I guess they're a couple months behind the CIA in making this big announcement, but what's coming along with it? What do you think is the big deal here?
Well, essentially, it's really more. It's very ironic because when William Burns announced the new China Mission Center a couple months ago, I believe it was the new the new Chinese ambassador to the U.S. who came out and said, why don't you drop your James Bond theatrics already? But now we have actually MI6 coming out and saying that China is their main priority, the greatest threat. Although they also said, and this is also notable for the Iran talks, that the big four security challenges facing them right now are China, Russia, Iran, and terrorism. And as far as China goes, they said that a miscalculation from China, this is Moore, I should say, the head of MI6, Richard Moore, he says a miscalculation from China concerning America's power could very easily lead to a war. He said, quote, Beijing believes its own propaganda about Western frailties and underestimates Washington's resolve. The risk of Chinese miscalculation through overconfidence is real. And he said China is a, quote, authoritarian state with different values than ours. Also said some more stuff about how Russia is an acute threat to the international rules-based system, more of that same boilerplate rhetoric we were talking about earlier. And he said that, with everything going on right now in Eastern Europe and on Russia's border, he says we and our allies and partners must stand up to and deter Russian activity, which contravenes the international rules-based system.
All right, Connor.